Since your tummy is empty after giving birth, you should be able to do the housework, right? When I returned home after giving birth to triplets, I found out our home had turned into a hole. My husband believed that I had been neglecting house chores using pregnancy as an excuse. He said now that I had given birth, I had no reason to slack off. Seeing me struggle with chores in my frail state, he declared, "I'll call my mother. She'll teach you how you should be as a housewife." My mother-in-law is notoriously strict, and to be honest, I've always found her difficult to deal with. Soon after his phone call, she came around with a furious look on her face. But what happened was something I could have never imagined. I lost my parents when I was young, and I was raised by my grandmother, but she passed away before I graduated from high school. With the help of kind neighbors, I managed to graduate high school. I found a job right after graduation and left my hometown. I had no choice but to sell my grandmother's house, so I no longer have a home to go back to. Fortunately, the people I worked with were very nice to me, and I met someone who I wanted to be married to. When I visited his parents for the first time to announce our marriage, I felt scared by just looking at his mother's strict face. My husband didn't plan to live with his parents, so we started our married life just the two of us. He was a very dependable husband, and though I handled most of the housework, his words with appreciation made me happy. My husband would tell me how good my cooking was, and that alone was enough to make me happy in our marriage. Around our 6-month anniversary, we found out that I was pregnant with triplets. The odds of naturally conceiving triplets are about 1 in 700,000. Since it was my first pregnancy, and I had no parents to rely on, I took maternity leave early. I had a strange feeling of happiness mixed with a little fear as my body was changing. A female colleague of my husband, who had been kind to me since we started dating, had gone on maternity leave a few months earlier. She had worked almost until she gave birth, which I found incredibly powerful compared to my situation. I told her that I felt pregnant for the first time and expressed my fears and worries to her. She reassured me, saying everyone's nervous the first time. Her words kept me going as my little babies grew inside me. But my husband didn't see it that way. He accused me of slacking off whenever he noticed the slightest lapse in household chores. I wasn't intentionally cutting corners. Despite my complaints of nausea, heartburn, and fatigue, which I had never experienced before, he dismissed them as my imagination. "I'm out working for the family, and you want me to do the housework you neglected. You do nothing but lie around all day, enjoying 3 meals and naps. How lazy you are." To him, housework wasn't a job. It was a woman's duty. Sure, I did most of the housework before I got pregnant, but he always helped me a little when I asked. When I pointed this out to him, he replied, "Housework is a woman's duty. Of course, you should do 99.9% of it, since I'm the one who earns the money. 0.1% of my help is more than enough." I then realized that there was no point in arguing anymore. I gave up and tried to meet his demands while sneaking in some rest. A few months had passed, perhaps because of this stress. I was hospitalized for a possible premature labor. The triplets were still too small, and an early birth would decrease their chances of survival. So, I was ordered to complete bed rest. I told my husband on the phone, and then he did come after his shift. "But staying in the hospital, you're not even due yet. You asked the doctor to stay in the hospital so you can avoid housework, didn't you?" He accused. Didn't he hear from the doctor? I was shocked. I had called him because the doctor wanted to explain the situation to both of us and asked him to come as soon as possible. "Who's going to cook for me while you're here? You managed to come here for doctor's appointments so far, right? You'll be fine. Let's go home." He started packing my stuff and tried to drag me out of the bed. "Do you know how much it will cost to stay here? I have no intention of paying medical bills for someone who's not even sick. A C-section childbirth should be natural. Don't do anything that deviates from the laws of nature. Shame on you." His mention of a C-section showed that he had at least heard the explanation, but he clearly had not understood any of it. It was too early to give birth. The babies had to grow inside me. Hospitalization wasn't just a choice, it was a necessity. Besides having triplets, a C-section had been the plan from the beginning. I would have preferred a natural birth if it weren't for the triplets. But my husband, who hadn't helped me with anything at all, was full of disdain. "You just got me pregnant, and now you abandoned me." My anger against him was building up. If it were just about me, I can bear it, but 3 new precious lives were growing inside me. I'd do anything to protect them. But no matter how I tried to explain, my husband wouldn't listen. And from the anger, I started struggling to breathe. That's when a midwife rushed into the room. My husband was kicked out of the room, and I could hear him getting scolded. This was a matter of life and death, and his behavior was dangerously close to being reportable. Other pregnant women were so disturbed by him. They complained to him. After that, he behaved himself in the hospital. With one problem less, I thought I could focus on the babies. But I had to have a C-section soon, even though it was a little early for them. My biggest concern was whether they would be born healthy. But to my relief, the triplets were strong and healthy, happy babies. However, because they were born prematurely, they needed to stay in the hospital for a while. Even though my stay was longer compared to natural birth, I was discharged before my babies. When I got home, still feeling weak, I found out that the house had turned into a hole. "You're the one who got away from housework for such a long time, so it's not my fault. But since you're back home now, hurry up, clean the house, and cook something for me." It was obvious that while I was in the hospital, he hadn't done anything around the house at all. Instead of washing clothes, he seemed to have just bought new ones and piled them up. I could tell if he was ordering food or buying takeout every night by the dirty food boxes or containers of rotten leftovers all over the place. The awful smell was undoubtedly from all this mess. There was no way I could clean up all this mess in a day or two, and I stood there stunned. "You slimmed down around the belly. Should be easier to move around, right? So don't just stand there and get to work." He never visited me when I was hospitalized and didn't even come to pick me up. I was foolish enough to have a little hope that he might welcome me back home. In reality, I should never have expected anything from him. I was still not in the best condition after the delivery, yet I started cleaning up little by little, taking breaks in between. But whenever I was resting, he would find me and say, "Don't slack off, get up, and start cooking. Don't you understand that I should be the priority?" No matter how I tried to explain my situation, he just saw it as an excuse to slack off. I also had to visit the triplets in the hospital and pump milk. I couldn't just clean all the time. He demanded home-cooked meals, but the kitchen was filthy with a pile of garbage. I didn't think it was a good idea to prepare food in such condition, so I resorted to buying pre-cooked meals. I managed to go shopping, but I wasn't recovered enough to cook from scratch. So picking different pre-cooked meals each day was all I could manage. The regret of not being able to carry the triplets to full term haunted me, keeping me awake at night. I think that too contributed to my slow recovery. I begged my husband to take it easy on me, warning him that at this rate, I might end up back in the hospital, but in a different way. But he sternly refused, saying, "I won't accept any more hospital stays just because you want to avoid housework." I continued to sneak in breaks while doing chores. Eventually, I reached my limit and fell asleep without noticing his return, sleeping instead of greeting me when I returned from work. What a life you have. Do you realize who you owe your livelihood to? You need to be re-educated as a wife. I'll tell my mother about your laziness and have her set you straight. He said that and called his mother right in front of me. He told her, "I checked myself into the hospital just to avoid housework and to try to slack off using postpartum as an excuse." He would say his mother was strict with discipline. The memories of her scolding him as a child were still vivid in his mind. I had found her intimidating since the first time I met her. She had always seemed stern and hard to approach. I was terrified that it was my turn to receive strict discipline from my mother-in-law. She was supposed to come the next day, but on the day my husband rushed out of the house to avoid her, using some work-related meeting as an excuse. Right after he left the house, there she was arriving with a fierce look on her face. I braced myself for a scolding before I could even greet her. "What are you doing?" she said. I thought, Here comes the criticism for my cleaning. You should be resting after risking your life for giving birth. She took the vacuum cleaner from me, put on her apron, then started to clean. She questioned me if I've been able to have enough rest in a clean bed, and then decided which room to clean first. Once one of the rooms was clean, she told me to rest there. I wondered if it was okay, but my body was already screaming its limits. Intending to rest only briefly, I ended up resting deeply. I woke up and rushed out of the room to look for my meal and found that she had not only taken care of the piled-up laundry, but also prepared a warm meal. Though there were still rooms that needed to be cleaned, the house was transformed into a livable space. I couldn't be more grateful for what she had done all by herself. Then my husband came home. Seeing the living room and entrance cleaned, he was triumphantly convinced that his judgment was right. My mom really did a good job teaching my lazy wife a lesson. I guess I've been too lenient with my wife. I'll learn from you and start being strict with her, he exclaimed. He saw the warm and appetizing meal. He started eating by himself. Suddenly, my mill snatched the meal from him and took the fork out of his hand. Who said you could eat? Get down on the floor, she commanded with an undeniable force, making my husband jump out of his chair and kneel on the floor. She asked him what the hell he had done to his own wife. She said to him, "Childbirth is a life-threatening event, and you, instead of caring for your wife who went through it, made her do household chores. I did not raise such a worthless son. How on earth could you think she stayed in the hospital just to escape housework? You disregard the value of life too much, like a monster wearing human skin. Don't you know what a C-section is? It's surgery where the abdomen is cut open. How dare you leave the house so dirty and do nothing about it while your wife needed to rest in a clean environment? You are the one in need of discipline, not your wife, you useless bust." The scene was unbelievable, like a grown man being scolded like a child. You never change, do you? You take the opinions of others at face value, and when corrected, you become stubborn and refuse to listen. Your father now acts more responsibly, you foolish son, she continued. She questioned him why he mistreated his postpartum wife, and my husband confessed. He was influenced by a male colleague. He was told that women use pregnancy as a weapon to become bold and impudent. Pregnant women slack off on household chores using morning sickness as an excuse and opt for easy childbirth using the baby as a reason. They would conveniently control the men because the men don't know any better. She was infuriated to find out that her son believed such an absurd story, and he had been oppressing me. I was worried that her blood pressure would rise so high and cause a stroke. He was unable to retort, just shriveled up. My mill had offered to help with postpartum care, but my husband declined, saying he would take care of me, which she initially admired as his growth. However, the reality was the opposite, and she apologized to me for not visiting, having trusted her words. I felt touched knowing she had been so concerned about me. My mill was strict but very sensible. She said that anyone who spreads falsehoods is no good colleague at all. She told him off not to believe such people. He optimistically said, as for that colleague, he was away on a business trip for a while, so there was no need to worry about it anymore. I doubted whether he truly understood, and my mill seemed to share my skepticism. She was looking down at him doubtfully. After this incident, my husband became more cooperative, and my health improved. Eventually, I was able to manage grocery shopping after visiting the triplets at the hospital. My mill still regularly came over to help and left pre-cooked meals that could be stored for later. I felt so grateful for her kindness. When the triplets came home from the hospital, she visited almost every day, reminding my husband of the importance of family. Initially, he refused to change diapers, but fearing my mill's wrath, he reluctantly started helping. He would attentively care for the children in her presence, but once she left, he would cease doing anything. His attitude became apparent even without her watching, leading him to busily search the house for hidden cameras. It was obvious to her anyway by just watching him changing diapers. However, the once tiny triplets grew up fast. Eventually, my husband gave in and only helped with diapers and feeding. Until the triplets started one for nighttime crying, He claimed he had work the next day, used earplugs, and went to sleep. This left me feeling like being a single mom. Then one day, he casually remarked, "The triplets are 1 year old now. You can handle them alone, right? The hardest part is still to come." Had he been influenced again by that same colleague? Upon further conversation, he mentioned that his female colleague who had returned from maternity leave said childcare became easier once the child turned 1. It was the same colleague who had encouraged me during my anxious first pregnancy. Would you really say something so careless? So now that you've been slacking on housework for so long, time to go full throttle. Child care and housework are women's jobs, not for men. By the way, when are you going back to work? I didn't plan to have 3 babies. I can't feed them by myself. With these words, I was certain the colleague who had been away on business had returned and filled my husband's head with more falsehoods. He would leave his clothes around and never clean up after meals. He seemed to have regressed to the days when he expected everything to be done for him. Bath, meals, tea, with 3 toddlers moving around. I couldn't manage all the housework. I claimed that if he wanted the housework done, he needed to participate in childcare. But as I expected, he labeled it as an excuse for slacking. Moreover, his lack of interest in the children, he often left dangerous items like razors within their reach. When I pointed it out, he would scoff, saying, "I used to handle it before pregnancy." He even insisted that the one who notices should put away. This led to arguments, and in his frustration, he started ignoring me and the children. He would step over them as they lay on the floor. He couldn't have stepped on them if they made little movement. I told him to be more careful with them, but he ignored. Because I protected the children and told him off, he became even more stubborn and sulky. I gave up, and I consulted my mill. The next morning, she came over, woke up my still sleeping husband, and took him back to her place. A few days later, they returned, and my husband looked drained. I could tell he had undergone intense re-education. He kneeled before me, half crying, apologizing. He looked quite shocked and exhausted from being scolded and beaten back by his mother. The shock seemed to stem mainly from being lectured at work about his complaints. Angry at being scolded by his mother, he had vented at the office about what a terrible wife I was. The recently returned female colleague, hearing his complaints, asked, "Triplets?" When my husband nodded, she erupted in fury. I said child care gets a bit easier at 1 year old for 1 child, not triplets. How can you leave your wife alone with 3 babies? What kind of father are you? She told him off. Even the other men in the office were astonished. It's a miracle she hasn't divorced you yet. The issue escalated, and his boss also reprimanded him severely. Rumors had spread that he was abusive towards me and the children. At the same time, the male colleague who had misled him was being fired for inappropriate behavior towards female colleagues. He had claimed to be on a business trip, but it was just a cover for dealing with his divorce. Upon returning, he was faced with a complaint filed against him, leading to police involvement. My husband, realizing the gravity of the situation after his boss declared an investigation into these rumors, finally felt a sense of crisis. His mother also warned him that if he was abandoned by his wife, she too would forsake him. Her stern words questioning his urge to push me back to work and his failure to support the family alone when he claimed to be the head made him change. I was wrong. I'll change and devote myself to my wife and children. Please don't leave me, he begged. My mill told me to tell him anything freely, but I decided to forgive him just this once. However, I made it clear one more slip, and I wouldn't forgive him. Since then, he has changed, actively engaging in housework and childcare. He even bought cooking books for simple men's recipes, and cooking on the weekends became his routine. Occasionally, my mill would drop by and announce to play with the children, and it was a huge help. By the time the triplets were old enough to go to daycare, he had learned to care for them well enough that I felt comfortable working part-time. I had to give up my full-time job to take care of my triplets. However, I plan to increase my hours and hopefully return to full-time work once they start school. If it weren't for my mill's help, we would never be able to continue as a family. I am immensely grateful for her support and hope to repay her kindness in time.